Well, dude, this is one of those interviews where I got my ass handed to me. Not really, but it's an interview that will change my behavior, both as a trainer and a coach and as a wife and mother. Today, I spoke to Brooke Schnittman, who is an expert in the field of ADHD management and support. She is the author of the best-selling book, Activate Your ADHD Potential. She's the host of the award-winning Successful with ADHD podcast. She's been featured in Entrepreneur and Forbes magazine, and she's received multiple awards and recognition for her growing company, Coaching with Brooke, which is the leading authority on ADHD coaching. Okay, so one of the reasons that I reached out to Brooke is because I came across my name on Reddit. To my surprise, the mention was in the forum ADHD Women. So it wasn't in a fitness or weight loss category. It was in ADHD Women. So I opened it up and there's this massive thread where someone has posted a picture of a page of my book where I talk about the habit loop and how you can use the habit, trigger, behavior, reward loop to automate healthy habits and make them as easy as brushing your teeth. And the response was, for some of us, brushing our teeth is not easy. And I read all 700 and something comments. Some of them were really, really upset. And I concluded that, wow, I have a lot to learn about ADHD and specifically the effect of ADHD on making healthy habits happen. Maybe you have a lot to learn about that too. So I got Brooke to come and talk to us. And today you are going to learn why we are hearing so much about women with ADHD these days. I thought it was just my algorithm, but apparently this is a massive story these days. And we're going to talk about how ADHD looks different in women than it does in men or children. We're going to talk about why it might be hard for someone with ADHD to automate teeth brushing and how they can make that easier. We're going to also learn how ADHD can affect things like impulse control when it comes to things like food cravings, and how people with ADHD can activate their superpower. Here's Brooke.
Breaking news. Your dream life isn't going to happen because you made a vision board. You're going to need goals, grit, and some woo-woo shit. This podcast is about getting clarity on what you want, having the grit to do the actual work, and most importantly, constantly training your brain to be your bitch. Ready to be inspired? Here is your host, best-selling author, Una Duncan.
Hey, Brooke, I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, so can we just jump into it? Can you share your personal journey and experience with ADHD and tell us how you ended up becoming an ADHD expert?
Sure. It's very unusual. So I didn't know I had ADHD until 15 years into my ADHD journey of working with students and adults. So I graduated with my master's from NYU in Students with Disabilities, became a special education teacher, moved up to assistant director of special education, did that in 15 years. And I realized that in the public school system, I was in wonderful school districts, but I still wasn't able to help in the way that I wanted to. Plus, I didn't become a teacher to become an administrator. So I didn't really enjoy paper pushing and all of the, the behind the scenes stuff. So I wanted to start my own company in the neurodivergent space as a consultant or something to that extent, but I didn't know in what. And fast forward, I moved to Florida, met a friend who was an ADHD coach, and she said, you would be a great ADHD coach. This was a year after me receiving coaching. I didn't even know that I was receiving coaching, but I was in a program that was life-changing to me. So all of the things came together and I was like, okay, sign me up. So I became an ADHD coach after all of my certifications. And then from there, I learned 6 months into doing it that I too had ADHD. So I was working with students and adults, and then I shifted to being in the online space in 2019. And I was like, oh my God, these adults are having a lot of the same type of symptoms that I experience. For instance, I am, let's say, working with them online, and I love that. But at the same time, then I need to write my notes, and that sucks. And then I have to come back to coaching. So that like shifting and sustaining attention was really challenging for me. So then I started putting the pieces together because I was living the experience and meeting with thousands of people, right? And I met with a psychologist and she confirmed that I had ADHD combined type.
Wow. So even in all that time that you were an expert, you didn't you were assuming I am neurotypical. And it wasn't until you got to
I
start
knew I
working with
wasn't
adult women?
neurotypical. I mean, who really is? But
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah. I had anxiety. I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, as many women with undiagnosed ADHD are. I was diagnosed as a child with auditory processing disorder and reading challenges for timed tests. So a lot of the signs were there. I just didn't recognize it in myself. I saw it in the students, but I didn't see many adults that had ADHD or adult women who had come out as having adult ADHD. I was dating many men with ADHD. My dad actually would make fun of me and he would say, "Are you a magnet to men with ADHD? Like, I don't understand." And what I didn't know at the time is that I was, because those were my people, the ADHD men to date and the children to work with as a teacher.
Right. Oh, isn't that funny? So does ADHD present itself differently in adults and specifically adult women versus children?
So it can. There are things that are naturally presented in life as an adult that you don't experience as a child. When you're a child, you're solely working on academics, right? And friendships and transitioning out of bed into school and then back. And usually your parents and your teachers act as your executive functions. So there is not as many executive functioning decisions and processes that you have to do. When you're an adult, you're faced with different things such as taxes, relationships with spouses, children, managing a household. Those things aren't even a thing when you're a child. So many people who were diagnosed as having ADHD as a child and got it managed because they had the support in the school or outside of school come back to me as a 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, 60-year-old and saying, "Wow, I'm experiencing these symptoms in a different way. And I had it managed for these 20, 30 years, but now I'm experiencing different things."
So can you describe that a little bit more? I'm particularly curious about what was the moment that you were working with all these ADHD women and you were like, "Oh, that's me. I feel this way. I am having these same challenges." And to listeners, what might it look like for an adult woman?
Yeah, for me, really, it was just being on so many one-on-one coaching calls and trying to shift my attention. So being virtual and not being active as much as I used to be. So when I was working in a structured system where I wasn't my own boss, there were schedules and there were things that I had to follow. But I had to create my own system as an entrepreneur. And then it all started coming together because I was working with 5 to 7 clients a day. And that level of focus and shifting attention was really challenging for me. So, and then keeping up with the rest of life as well. So that's where I started putting the pieces together. But for other adults who are looking for symptoms, like if you're constantly struggling as an adult in your job, you're jumping your jobs every 2 to 3 years, or you're being put onto the performance plan because you're not following deadlines and due dates, or you want to follow your own system, but you're kind of forced to confine into a system that isn't working for you, or you are finding that you're having challenges following multi-step directions, or you're not managing your relationship responsibilities. Maybe one partner's taking on way more than the other partner. Like, what is getting in the way with that? And are you burnt out frequently because your mind is going in a million different directions. You might not be outwardly hyperactive, but inwardly you're like, where should I focus? Well, this is the child. This is, so there's so many different things that you don't even know where to start. Then I would consider looking up the ADHD symptoms. There's a lot of free tests out there. We have one on our website, Coaching with Brooke. And then if you match a lot of the symptoms, take it to a psychiatrist, psychologist, nurse practitioner, social worker, and see if you do in fact have ADHD, if you want to make changes medically or behaviorally.
Got it. And as I understand it, to get an ADHD diagnosis, there's not like a blood test or anything like that. It's more a questionnaire of symptoms and behaviors, and it's a spectrum.
Correct.
Is that true?
Correct. It is a spectrum. And the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic criteria for all the disorders, is nationally recognized. And a psychiatrist or psychologist will use that to diagnose you. However, there are other tests. So, and they're becoming more and more popular, like genetic testing, brain scans. So if you have all of those things together, you can see that, and you're qualifying for ADHD in all those areas, then it's obvious that you have it. But the most recognized is with the questionnaire and making sure that you have all of the symptoms out of 9 for ADHD. If you're an adult, you have to have 5 out of 9 symptoms. If you're a child, you have to have 6 out of 9 symptoms. And all of the symptoms of ADHD have to have manifested before the age of 12. So you've had to shown signs of it from childhood.
Huh. Okay. I feel like I am hearing about ADHD, especially in adult women, constantly these days. So is that just something about my algorithm, or I clicked on something once and now it's just feeding that to me? Or is there something going on?
Well, I can't speak for Instagram because I have no clue what they're up to. However, National Geographic came out today with another article about adult ADHD women. I was on a morning show last week about ADHD diagnoses on the rise for adult women. The Wall Street Journal just came out with an article on adult ADHD in women diagnoses on the rise. Since the pandemic, yes, people are starting to recognize their ADHD more so. And women, I'm going to try to be as politically correct as I can, but I think from a young age, we were taught to kind of mask things, right? Like we just went through pretending like everything was okay. And ours were a lot more psychosomatic, right? So our ADHD symptoms often showed as anxiety, depression, where boys as a child, they might be observed as hyperactive externally. So we were going undiagnosed for so long because our symptoms were very often the inattentive type or the interior hyperactivity. So as an adult with ADHD, once COVID hit, we were home. We had to be with ourselves for the first time and really be with ourselves. And there was no structure. And then our partners started picking up on things about ourselves. And then people had more time to be on social media. And mental health awareness was on the rise, all because of the pandemic. And where do ADHDers like to go but social media? Because very often we're managing our dopamine levels because they're below baseline. So we're seeking dopamine and we're going to social media where they're talking about mental health and ADHD. In 2022, ADHD, the hashtag was used 13 billion times. So I truly believe that that's why ADHDers as women are being more diagnosed now.
Got it. So it's not that the incidence of ADHD is increasing, it's the recognition is increasing. Is that true?
Correct.
Got it. Brooke, as you know, I reached out to you because I did a little vanity Google. I'm Googling myself, and I found that someone on the on the social media Reddit, on the sub forum, ADHD Women had posted a picture of a page of my book, and there were over 700 comments of people who were super, super pissed at me. And the sentence that they were talking about specifically is when I wrote, I'm talking about the habit loop and how we can create automatic habits with trigger behavior reward. And I said, imagine what a pain in the ass life would be if you had to muster up the fucks to do all that routine stuff every day. It would be impossible. You wouldn't get anything else done. And the reaction to that sentence, some people said it made them start crying immediately. Some people said they started showing it to all the members in their family, saying, this is what it's like to be me. That routine stuff. Because I say, like, you don't have to think about brushing your teeth. You don't have to think about showering. And I said, imagine what a pain in the ass it would be if you did. And they're like, this is what it's like to be me. I do have to think about these things. There was a lot of anger coming at me for coming from a position of neurotypical privilege. So the question that I've been dying to ask you is, so does the trigger behavior reward habit loop, does it not work for people with ADHD? Why can't they automate brushing their teeth or having a shower?
That's a really good question. So so since our dopamine levels are they're not the typical release of dopamine. In a neurotypical brain, dopamine gets hit like this, right? I don't know if this is a video podcast, but it's like, it's just, you get.
Well, they'll be listening mostly. So basically what Brooke's doing is she's showing that's like a level. It's at
Words
a level,
are hard right now. Yes, it's at a level.
Yes.
And with ADHD, the dopamine level drops baseline, and it also goes up in baseline. So when you are really motivated and you have really high dopamine levels, you can hyper focus on something. When you have really low dopamine levels, you hypo focus on something, meaning it's really hard to stay focused. So the reward system, if you think of like dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever, like that doesn't really work, right? Because their dopamine has dropped. So the reward system does not work like a neurotypical brain. However, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. I know that's like very gray. So is it difficult for ADHDers to set regular routines about brushing their teeth and hygiene? Hygiene is a challenge for individuals with ADHD. And at the same time, with the right support and structure, you can set up routines. So you might be inconsistently consistent. However, I work with thousands of individuals with ADHD that actually do set up routines that are healthy routines for themselves. We might not be able to manage it the same way that a neurotypical does, and it's challenging, and we have to break it down really, really small, almost to a child's like state where we feel like, whoa, However, we can create routines. It's just not the same as a neurotypical.
Okay, I want to break this down a little bit. So for example, when you said hygiene is hard for people with ADHD. So, for example, like it's like they're lying on the couch. I'm picturing actually my teenage son, and you're like, "Hey, dude, it's like 1:15 time for a shower. Like you're really due." And he's like, well, "I don't want to." Like it feels really hard for him to get off the couch and go have a shower. Is that the ADHD experience? It feels hard to go brush the teeth, have a shower.
Yeah. So we have a difficult time with initiation, and when we're not motivated to do something, and our dopamine levels are not on baseline, it is paralyzing to do certain things. So very often, if you use that example as like being on the couch or being in the shower for hours, or, being on the toilet and just like getting lost in time and space, that happens to us. So an object in motion stays in motion. If you're in motion more often, it can be a little bit easier because you're moving your body. But once you sit on the couch, very often you can be paralyzed as an ADHDer. So yes, I can't distinguish for you when your son is using that as an excuse or when his initiation is just so paralyzed that he can't get started.
How do you know if you're using it as an excuse or if you legitimately, have something that's not the same with you than it is with other people and that you require additional support and understanding? How do you make those distinctions? What would put off an alarm bell that someone's using it as an excuse?
So I want to just be very clear. Most of us are using ADHD as an explanation, not an excuse. So if you know that your child, let's start there, is capable regularly of doing certain things, right? And then all of a sudden they stop doing that thing. What happened, right? I think that we are all capable of greatness. And I think that when ADHD is managed the right way, it can be a superpower and you can thrive. But not everyone has the tools to thrive. Some people might not have the privilege to the tools. Some people might not know where to start. And then they can, and I don't want to say fall victim, but they can just be so overwhelmed that they get lost, right? So how do you differentiate between when you can do something and when you can't do something? I think it's just knowing the person and knowing their history, right? And really understanding them. And I do want to say that for so long, individuals with ADHD have had to conform to a neurotypical society. And that's really challenging. So I think that now that people are gaining some power back and some voice and some understanding, I think that they're speaking up a little bit more, and I think they're sharing some of the difficulties with the neurotypical community of like, hey, this isn't so easy for me now. But at the same time, I know I'm all over the place here, so I'm trying to give all of the facts here. At the same time, we do live in a world that isn't all neurotypical. So if you think about it, I had spoken to a friend who's a researcher. She said that 75% of the workforce has an invisible disability. That's the majority of people. So neurodivergence is really high. It's just that people aren't talking about it as much.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I mean, I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I have this strong memory of being at school pickup, and all of us moms and parents are standing there watching the kids play, and we're talking all about the additional supports that we're getting for our kids and the diagnoses and the tests that we're trying to access and all that stuff. And then I said, wait, does anybody here have a quote unquote normal kid? And then we all looked around the plate. We're like, oh, that kid's supposedly normal. And it was literally one kid that we thought that we knew of.
What is normal?
Some sort of diagnosis. Exactly.
Yeah. Can you even picture what that looks like?
Yeah. Well, and then when you, so when you described what it's like, I have a couple of questions. You said, because our dopamine is lower than average, it can be really hard to get off the couch. It can be really hard to find that motivation. And it's sort of, is it like a mini depression kind of feeling?
It's paralysis. It's like you literally, know how to do something and you need to do it, but you have a wall that's not allowing you to do the thing. So there's tricks that I've used for myself. Do they work all the time? No, but they work a lot of the time. And there's tricks out there that can get you that quick dopamine or like play with your executive dysfunction to get off the couch. But it does feel like a wall. And I don't think that most people with ADHD want to feel that way, right? It's a challenge. And at the same time, I believe that if you know and have the privilege to get support, that you can overcome a lot of the obstacles of ADHD.
So can you tell us some of the tricks? So if someone's stuck on the couch, or for example, I had one client who told me that when she wakes up, first thing she does is she reaches for her phone and she scrolls, and she knows that this is her one little window to do her workout. And she really wants to do it. She really wants to be the kind of person who wakes up and does her workout. But she just scrolls on the phone until it's time to go to work. And she just, and she knows, and she goes on and on about how she wants to change this behavior and she just can't. So that's one example. I don't know if that reminds you of an ADHD
no, that's
behavior.
perfect. Yes.
Okay.
So with ADHD, we're usually tending to everyone else's needs except for ours. So when she gets on the phone and the first thing in the morning, she's attending to everyone else's needs before hers. So one thing she can do before she goes to bed is set up an old school alarm, or, one of those sunrise alarm clocks, and not use her phone for an alarm. It just creates an extra barrier before going to that phone. And then have whatever little piece of that workout that she wants to do ready and available for her. Make it so simple with working out that she says in her mind, okay, I'm going to do 5 minutes of X, and this is what it's going to look like. And I'm going to have my clothes ready. And after that, I get the reward of coffee or whatever the reward is for her. Right. And generally speaking, we do way more than 5 minutes. Right. But make it fun and motivating. So how can she make exercise fun and not get trapped in the paralysis of her phone? Well, first, have your phone away, use a different thing for your alarm. And even if she needs to do the workout in her room, make it fun. Put on a dance show on your TV, or, ask Alexa to play a song so you can get your dopamine going. Andrew Huberman talks about exercising doesn't necessarily always give you dopamine. It's the excitingness of the exercise that gives you dopamine. So you have to do something that excites you. If you're dreading exercising and the exercising itself is not motivating, that's going to be a lot harder to produce the same levels of dopamine as an exciting workout.
That's interesting, because I was just about to ask you, so how can I support my clients with ADHD a little bit more? And so what I'm like, oh, switching up the workouts more often. So there's something new and novel, pairing with different, something like that. I think.
Yeah. And then also accountability too. We all do so much better when other people are doing it with us, or we have to report back to someone. So I pay someone to work out in their garage, not because I can't do the workout myself. It's just that if I pay, I'm a lot more likely to go.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I've definitely noticed that. Now, one of the people in that ADHD sub forum said, oh, I absolutely form habits, but only for high dopamine activities. And my thought when I read that was well, isn't that everyone? I mean, especially with all the overstimulation that everyone is facing right now, aren't we all kind of self-regulating to a higher dopamine requirement? And is that why everyone's identifying with this feeling?
I think that with technology, we are all depleting our dopamine levels in a much more rapid rate than before all of the notifications that were coming onto our phones and our emails. There's thousands of notifications a day, and that is depleting the dopamine. So a lot of people are getting into these dopamine detoxes, but it's still not the same thing as ADHD. ADHD is a neurological disorder. So some of these things that you're mentioning can mimic ADHD symptoms, but it's not on a regular routine where it's disrupting someone's life in their executive functions.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for that distinction. Now, I'd love a little bit of help, a little bit of coaching for example, someone with ADHD who how would it affect things like cravings? Is there less impulse
so we
control?
crave. Yes, absolutely. I yes.
Brooke's face right there, for those who didn't see the video, she was deep looking me in the eyes. Yes.
Period. The end. Okay. No. I just put a meme on Instagram. Typical ADHD, or my life, I forget what I named it, but it's asking someone for advice and then through text, and then 2 seconds later saying, never mind, I already did the stupid thing. I mean, seriously. So as far as impulse eating, there's a lot of ADHD dietitians and nutritionists out there that specialize in binge eating for individuals with ADHD. We can crave sugar, and that can come in the form of chocolate or processed carbs because our dopamine levels are unmanaged. And when we take stimulant medication, we can forget to eat until the end of the day, or we forget to make eating a priority. So we're so hyper-focused in on the work that we're doing that we forget to pee, we forget to drink water, we forget to eat. So all of those things, we're afraid of just stopping and doing that. So yes, we do get cravings as ADHDers, and usually it happens later on in the day because we're not nourishing our body every 3 to 4 hours and regulating our blood sugar.
Right. So for someone who experiences those kind of patterns, would you say, do yourself the favor of setting an alarm clock and reminding yourself to eat something with like protein and low glycemic carbohydrates every couple of hours?
Yeah, good question. So I would start with safe foods, things that are easy to eat, because reminders are great. And at the same time, we can tune out the reminders. So yes, so reminders can work until they don't. We have to micro switch our tasks. So try something until it stops working, then do something else. And then you can come back to the thing that was working, that stopped working. So these micro changes. So yeah, you could do the reminder thing. You could also have safe foods. For instance, have like an Ensure. My 2 stepsons drink Ensure for breakfast because it's easy. There's no putting together, there's no cleanup, and there's nutrition in it. I have a smoothie every day that is so easy to wake up to that I just put powder, ice, water, boom, done. So make things as easy as possible. Don't feel guilty about microwaving your food. If you're not eating and then you're binge eating, start with the simplest thing for you. Start with textures that work for you. We have sensitivity to texture sometimes. We can have hyperfixation foods. So that's okay. Eat whatever you can that's going to nourish your body every 3 to 4 hours if you can.
Good one.
And yes, reminders work.
Yeah, that's great. I was on your site and you have 10 things listed that are really helpful for people with ADHD. And so many of them are overlapping with things that I recommend to people, things like exercise, like sleeping, like meditation. Why do you think it is especially important for people with ADHD to really take care of themselves and their healthy habits?
So we have low vagal tone. So our vagus nervous system is impacted by our ADHD. So all of the natural healthy habits for humans are even that much more important for individuals with ADHD, or else we are in constant fight or flight mode.
So since these things are so important and maybe more challenging to habitualize, you would say one of the tricks really is to just attach a higher dopamine feel to these habits. Am I getting this right?
Yes. So yes, absolutely. We have a hard time doing anything without dopamine regulation. And that's why medication is so effective for individuals with ADHD, because that is going to more than 10x your dopamine levels for a sustained period of time if it works. It works for 80% of people. So yes, regulate your dopamine naturally or with medication, and make it so small that it's easy for you that you can check it off your list, and that check gives you dopamine. Right? It's like, yes, I did it. Okay, now I can do another thing. Yes, now I can do another thing. Now I can do really hard things. So like eating the frog, you're doing that hard thing first. And usually you're not motivated to do that hard thing. And that hard thing could literally be just making a phone call to your doctor and saying, hey, let's schedule an appointment, because that takes so much management of your executive functions.
Oh, got it. What about setting up the environment for success, is there anything that someone with ADHD would be particularly sensitive to as far as the role of their environment would play in them being able to do their healthy habits or just follow their intentions in general?
Yes. So clutter, we can be very cluttered, but that also disrupts our focus. So if you can work in a minimalistic area, that can be really helpful. Also, just having everything out in front and not hidden. So we have object permanence issues very often, and we forget about food that goes bad. We forget about clothes that we already have that we bought again, or we forget where we put this thing because it's not out there in the open. So I think like making sure that your environment is as open as possible with clear bins and having a launch pad for the things that you know you need, making the clutter, if you could have a body double or a partner who helps you get rid of that clutter, because it can be so helpful to just stay organized and focused. So that's one thing.
Oh, that's great. I've always associated ADHD with running thoughts in your head. And so you tell me if I've got this wrong, which I think everyone has, but maybe more so if you have ADHD. And in my world, a lot of my clients have running thoughts about their body and their fitness level, or their ability to achieve their goals or their character. Do you think this kind of judgmental mind chatter is worse for people with ADHD? And if so,
Yes.
What can they do about it?
Yes. So we have, by the age of 10, I think we have 20,000 more negative messages than a neurotypical person.
Oh.
So because of that, that increases the negative thoughts, of course.
And sorry, Brooke, when you say more negative messages, is that internal thoughts or is that our teacher saying, sit down, stop interrupting?
That.
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
Which then leads to negative thoughts. So it's the external things that we're receiving that is that we're internalizing them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I see. So what can we do if you've been processing this since you were 10 years old?
Yeah, it's managing your ADHD, getting the right systems and structures. So if you need medication, get the medication. If you need tools, go see a coach. It doesn't necessarily even have to be an ADHD coach, right? Get systems that work for your brain. And if it's a life coach that doesn't specialize in ADHD, tell them what it's like and tell them what you want to work on, and perhaps they can help you. Work with, a friend. You might need cognitive behavioral therapy. You might need DBT. Right now, I'm doing EMDR and IFS because of all the negative stuff that happened in my childhood. I still create some stories because my brain can't differentiate from reality and story sometimes, right? So even though I have all of the amazing coaching tools in my belt and I'm creating structure and routines, which is super helpful for ADHDers. We hate structure, but thrive on it at the same time. Structure is everything. And that's, again, why I learned I had ADHD, because the structure wasn't there. I had to create the structure. But I would say making sure that you have structure that works for your brain and you can rely on it. And when you rely on the structure, then you can build on that structure and then you can become more confident. But if you can't rely on your system, then you can't rely on anything because you're receiving negative messages, you have these negative thoughts, and you can't rely on your process either.
Wow. That's so interesting because I think that trying to find the balance between structure and flow and sweetness, like that is kind of the ultimate question, at least in my field. And maybe it sounds like yours too. And I think, oh man, so it sounds like it's even harder for people with ADHD because as I'm guessing they might want that flow even more. They might feel even more rebellious to structure. Is that true?
Yeah, 100%. We hate structure, but thrive on it at the same time. So structure might be, okay, on Friday, I am going to spend 4 hours in a flow state because I know what gets me into a flow state. A lot of ADHDers are hard chargers, which means if they have a very intense workout, they can get into a flow state and hyper focus. So that it's just intentional structure. So it doesn't have to be, okay, every 10 minutes or every 20 minutes, I'm going to give myself a 5-minute break and a reward, and then I'm going to come back. It doesn't have to be the Pomodoro method. It can be whatever you want it to be, but it has to be something that you can rely on and not burn out from it either. Because if you're hyper focusing every single day for 4 hours and you're in a flow state, Stephen Kotler talks about, okay, how do you come back from the flow state? How do you make sure that you don't crash and then need a day to recover, which many ADHDers have a problem with. They spend all day in this amazing zone of focus and get so many things done that neurotypicals cannot. And then the next day they're out. They can't do anything. They can't get out of bed because they've totally drained their dopamine.
Right. Oh, so that leads me to what I wanted to finally ask you is you mentioned that ADHD can be a superpower. So is that what you're talking about? That ability to just hyper focus and get so much done?
That's part of it. I also think that there are so many positives that is innate in an ADHD brain. I think we have really good intuition. It's just that we don't trust it. We have empathy, right? But we don't have empathy for ourselves. So how do you tap into that? There's so many double-edged swords of ADHD, right? So if you can tap into all of the positives and really trust it with the right systems and tools, then it's a superpower. But you need to make sure that you can learn how to trust it. We can problem solve a lot quicker than neurotypicals very often. We can get to the root cause of a problem. We might not be able to explain the steps on how we got there, but we can get there a lot quicker than neurotypicals. We are creative. We can, so there's so many things that naturally we're good at. We just have to harness it.
Oh, so good. Now I know there's going to be so many people listening to be like, oh my gosh, that's me. Finally, someone who understands me and knows what I need. Where can people follow up with you, learn about coaching with you in your programs?
Sure. Everything is coaching with Brooke with an E. And I have a podcast, Successful with 2 L's with ADHD, and my book, Activate Your ADHD Potential. You can go read about the process that I talk about in attending to your hierarchy of needs first, and then building and maintaining momentum with short, small steps that are manageable. But yeah, everything is pretty much coaching with Brooke with an E.
Perfect. And just to clarify, you work with adult women, you work with children, you help families support children.
So I have a
right?
team, all of it. I have a team of coaches worldwide. I specifically work with entrepreneurs, but my team work with students, adults, and parents of all ages in a one-on-one and group setting.
That's amazing. Brooke, I've learned so much talking to you. I really appreciate you coming on and teaching me about all this.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Okay, what did you think of that? Okay, so here are my big takeaways and things that I'm going to consider as I deal with the people in my life who have ADHD. So first of all, small wins. I mean, I think this is so important for anyone who's feeling a lack of motivation. Just make your habits smaller so that it's dealable. And oh my gosh, please reward yourself. If something is going to be a habit for anyone, but maybe especially for people with ADHD, it's got to feel exciting and fun. If it feels like a duty, you are on a countdown until your willpower runs out, and it will. And structure, from not having your phone by your bed to decluttering your space and even scheduling time to be in unstructured flow. People with ADHD really benefit from structure and routine. And I love the irony that the people who need it the most are often the most resistant. I would love to hear what you got out of this episode. And hey, listen, let me know if there is an expert or a subject that you are wondering about and you'd love for me to cover it. Send me a DM on Instagram at Una Duncan. Until next week.
Hey dude, thanks for listening. If you like this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you can get the next one. And by the way, if you rate and review this podcast, it really helps me get found by other people who need some goals, grit, and some woo-woo shit. And be sure to connect and DM me at Una Duncan on Instagram and let me know what you thought of the episode. Chat soon.